My sister hugged me at the funeral and whispered, "We'll be okay." 2 weeks later she signed the papers and bought new curtains with my name on a receipt. She smiled like she hadn't taken a thing, but I had the bank statements, the receipts, and the text messages. Tonight, at her wedding, I hand them to the woman who kept pretending we were the same. Watch what happens when the whole room realizes she lied. I grew up thinking some things were sacred. The oak table where my mother braided our hair, the stained map of our town on the attic wall, the idea that when the end came we would divide things like grown-up humans. After the funeral, people said the right things. Condolences, casseroles, the tight-lipped call if you need anything. My sister kissed me on the cheek and told me to rest. I believed her because I wanted to. I wanted family to be loyal, neat, and ordinary. I didn't realize that loyalty can be a costume you wear to hide a different logic, one that puts profit ahead of memory. I watched her clean our parents' things and felt a strange distance, like the house had been taped off and I'd been put outside. A week later she told me she'd handled the will. She said the lawyer recommended a simpler distribution. My stomach dropped, but I smiled. I told myself adults sometimes make practical choices. That night I replayed her laugh in my head and tried to find the person I used to trust. I found only the shadow of someone who could lie comfortably. What I didn't know then was how many small red flags would stitch into a pattern. I would watch them, collect them, until the story they told stopped being deniable. And I could feel, faint and steady, that this wasn't over. I began with the smallest thing, a receipt. An envelope of my mother's knitting needles. Gone. A dinner invitation with my name crossed out in the RSVP. Nothing that seemed like proof at first, but enough to make me look harder. I dug through old boxes, asked awkward questions, and learned how people avoid answers with too much kindness. Then I found the first real irregularity. A notarized amendment dated 3 months after the funeral, signed by a lawyer I'd never heard of. The signature looked familiar. My sister's, steady and practiced. I asked her about it. She smiled, deflected. I dug further. Bank transfers in amounts I didn't expect. A cashier's check paid to her name for repairs done urgently. Text messages from vendors referencing keys she had kept safe. Each small paper was a splinter under my fingernail. I photographed everything. At night I arranged the evidence like a puzzle on the dining table until the picture was obvious. This was not an accident. It was a plan. But who plans to steal from their own family with such calm? I began to understand that people who betray do it with routines designed to look like care. When I brought it up at the next family dinner, I expected outrage or at least confusion. Instead, there was a kind of practiced blindness. "You're remembering wrong," an aunt said. "She did what was best for the house." They smiled and folded their napkins, as if the evening were a stage and we were all playing parts. My sister sat across from me, calm and untroubled, telling a story about paint colors. I realized the gaslighting had been layered over months. Subtle comments about my spending, jokes about me being emotional, even the way they'd paused before agreeing when I said the word will. It was like living in a room where the thermostat had been changed and no one told me. I kept complaining about the cold while everyone else shrugged. The more I pushed, the more they suggested I was unstable. They wanted me to stop asking questions. That was when I decided to stop asking. I would gather everything and let the truth speak loud enough that it couldn't be softened by smiles. People who steal often make a small mistake. A duplicate receipt, a copied invoice, a stray comment on social media. I waited and watched for that mistake. Months later, at a contractor's online profile, I found a photo of my sister signing a check. And in the comment thread, a casual congratulations with the date of a project that matched a transfer on her account. It was a tiny public footprint, but it connected to everything else. I showed it to a friend who'd worked in finance. They blinked and said, "This is a trail." The adrenaline was sharp and practical. I created timelines, matched transactions to dates of possession, and gathered witness statements from the neighbor who'd seen movers arrive at odd hours. The pieces assembled into a map of intent. She hadn't simply received something by mistake. She'd orchestrated transfers, rentals, and urgent repairs that made the money look justified. When the map was complete, I realized the only place left for a resolution was a public one, because private complaints had been smothered by smiles. I wanted a confrontation that couldn't be smoothed over in the kitchen. A wedding was a place of witnesses, cameras, and performative love, and my sister was having one. It felt calculated, but so was the theft. I wrote a letter and didn't send it. I rehearsed a few lines and discarded them as too theatrical. What I did keep was the evidence. PDFs, photos, bank printouts. I packaged them in an envelope addressed to the people who mattered, the relatives who still trusted me, the guests who would need to see. I called the venue and asked about pauses in the schedule, about the moment between vows and speeches. I didn't plan to shout or to cause a scene for the sake of shock. I planned to make the truth unavoidable. The ethics of exposing family in public crawled under my skin. I asked myself whether justice required spectacle or whether I was just being cruel. The answer came slowly. When the private channels failed, public truth was the only correction left. On the eve of the wedding, I pulled out old photos. My sister and I at 12, muddy knees and matching sweaters. The pictures hurt in a way no bank statement could. I lay awake imagining every possible outcome. Would I burn bridges beyond repair? Would our parents' memory be dragged into a family fight? I pictured her face when she realized I had the paper trail, the bright smile curdling when she read proofs in other people's hands. At 3 a.m., I wrote a short note to myself. I am acting to reclaim what was taken. I slept with a small, neat stack of evidence in my bag. In the morning, the town seemed ordinary, as if nothing had been stolen at all. The venue smelled like lilies and buttercream. I felt absurdly calm, the way you feel before you cut something infected free, terrified but certain it has to be done. Her vows were soft and polished. People cried, and someone laughed at the right moment. When the reception music began, I rose and asked the DJ if I could have a moment before the speeches. By then my hands were steady. I walked to the head table, feeling like a character crossing an audience's skin. I set the envelope beside the cake and asked the maid of honor to open it and read aloud. There was a silence like someone holding their breath underwater. The maid of honor unfolded the first page and read numbers and dates and names, the transfers that matched my parents' savings, the altered legal page notarized in a different county. In the second paragraph, she read a vendor's message confirming who had given the keys away. You could see people recalibrate in real time. Smiles wavered, wine glasses paused. My sister's face went pale and then hard. She tried to laugh it off, then asked for the envelope, then realized the copies were in 10 other hands. Her laugh died. Everyone's voice changed pitch. Confusion, then anger, then the slow recognition that we had all been lied to. What happened next wasn't cinematic in the way I'd imagined. There was shouting, pleading, and a neighbor recording on their phone. Some people stood up for her, refusing to believe the documents. Others wept and asked how they'd been fooled. My sister grabbed her coat and left the venue like someone fleeing a stage. People came to me, relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, and said they were sorry they hadn't listened. I felt vindication wrapped in a complicated, bitter comfort. The next days were emails, a lawyer's voicemail, and the inevitable social media threads. Few friends asked me if I regretted it. I didn't. But I also grieved the loss of what could have been reconciled in another life. It struck me that exposing truth doesn't magically fix trust. It simply removes the pretense. Months later, I stood in the house I'd grown up in with the neighbor's help, packing boxes and deciding what to keep. The legal process had begun. Some accounts were frozen, a partial settlement negotiated. My sister had moved away. People who had been distant reached out with awkward apologies, and a few I expected support from never called. I learned to be alone without feeling empty. I learned to measure loyalty by actions rather than by words. At night I sometimes opened the envelope and read the exact wording of her signature, not to relish it but to remind myself why I'd done it. The hardest lesson was that justice and forgiveness are different things. I could choose justice, the small, practical return of what was taken, or forgiveness that might mean swallowing the loss again. Chose boundaries. I chose to build a family that wouldn't gaslight me into silence. The cost was real. But for the first time in a long while I could breathe in a house that felt like mine.